Hey, fellow Gianteers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we are talking about ego. Daniel had this thing, his creation of a way of thinking about this, the existential guardian operating system. And so it's kind of like in the flow of that, but actually pretty different. So, we want to talk about the ego in terms of like Eastern thought. And so to my mind, Daniel, this is going to be an episode talking about some fairly intense shit.
Ooh,
because it's deep. And it kind of follows from what we were talking about with this existential guardian operating system, but I wanted to bring kind of an Eastern flavor to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Put a little kimchi on it or something like that.
Ooh, okay. A little
So when you oyster sauce. When you first brought it up, a little wasabi, maybe even make it a little spicy. It's not that spicy. We might have spicy episodes coming, but okay. Spicier episodes in the future, because we're going to talk about relationships and sexuality. We've been kind of talking about that stuff, and those are in the pipeline.
Yeah.
But when you first brought the whole idea up of talking about the ego, this was the thing that popped in my mind first. And so, it was something that we had in the idea of talking about ego in this sense. So we're going to talk about this thing called the mind only school, or the yogic experience school, Chittamatra, which means mind only, or Yogacara, which means yogic experience schools of sort of Buddhist approach. Zen is one of these. And whenever you start talking about Zen, it's going to be some kind of crazy, intense shit associated with that. And we're going to build, foreshadowing, to this radical claim that there is no external world apart from the mind or the consciousness. And this is what they mean by yogic realization. So we'll get to that. We'll do a slow build getting to that. But what hit me with this as I was kind of doing some of my side of the prep on this was that it occurred to me that this is kind of like a podcast, like a podcast of ideas. Every once in a while I think about what we're doing. And I was like, yeah, this is a podcast of ideas. We were talking about this a little bit before we mic'd up officially to record. And to me, like, not just ideas just for the sake of ideas, like some kind of armchair philosophy or something like that. And not just ideas just for the sake of like arguments, like in politics or something. Just some kind of ideas like that make some rhetoric that you can throw up at social media just to argue with somebody else or something like that. Like, I don't like those things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you feel about that. What do you think? I'm not into it.
I think
I don't like ideas for the sake of ideas.
It's called mental masturbation.
I think I agree with that. I was having some text with somebody. I was like, I can't even talk about this shit that this person's talking about. I don't know what to say about it. It was just some bullshit.
There's so much of
political, rhetorical bullshit. And I was like, okay, whatever. Dude.
There's so much of it in general that like adding to that noise is already unnecessary and undesirable from our, our standpoint, really.
Yeah.
And like, there's like literally millions and millions and millions of podcasts. You know what I'm saying? We'll just get meta for a second, right? And talk about what we're doing, right? Break the fourth wall. Although who's writing me as a character? So that's a good question.
It'll be mind only in a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, we want to be able, you want to do your thing. You want to be authentic. You want to create something that is entertaining, obviously, but then educational. And where's the line between the two? And if you drift too far, I think on one way or the other, it tends to be more lecture, which is, you can go to school and get that, whatever. And if you're more educational, if you're more entertainment, then you're dealing in comedy or drama or, whatever those things are.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's not what we're not aiming to pull those strings.
It's kind of interesting because, we talked about it again off mic a little bit. We don't do like the issue of the week,
right?
Whatever it is, we just don't do that. And a lot of stuff is oriented around like, what did Kamala Harris say, and what did this happen, and
the NBA trade deadline. Oh God.
Yeah, we live in Chicago, so will the Bears trade their quarterback Justin Fields? Will they? Will they not? Anyways, like I'm not interested in those things,
right?
And it has something to do with authenticity. I think that's the right word.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what hit me was like, I think we're hopefully dealing in actually useful ideas,
right?
Things that might actually help you. And we were talking at the end of the last episode about the idea of like intoxicating thoughts. Some thoughts can have like an intoxicating power to them, like a verbal ayahuasca or something like that. They can really affect your mind. And I think that's what we're trying to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
A kind of that kind of a thing. So I think, to me, in context, I think this is what made me think about that with this episode, because this is kind of like a powerful idea. Make it of what you will. This whole thing we'll be talking about this Zen Chittamatra, Yogacara, mind only, yogic experience idea. It's like a powerful kind of idea. And if you can play with it, it's kind of like a little bit of a verbal drug or something like that. It tries to do something to you. It's like an idea that's like intoxicating thoughts, right? So okay. In my own notes, I kind of wrote down like, kind of my little summary in my own head about your idea of the existential guardian operating system. And it's a useful idea. And I guess that's what I was trying to get to. That's a useful idea. You're trying to share that with people to be a kind of a spur or a trigger to get people to think about their experience in some new way, right? It's like a tool, right? A mental tool, an idea tool, and you kind of frame it out there. And so, okay, yeah, I think that's what maybe kind of put all this together. Is that how you're thinking about that too?
Yeah. But you've sort of teased the idea of the Yogacara, so I want you to give it.
Oh yeah, we're gonna do it for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So the only thing about it is we talked about this ego thing, and there was like in the last episodes, and there was a certain way of thinking about that, right? Especially this idea that it functions as a kind of defensive thing. It can also function usefully, or it could function pathologically. You have to become aware of it.
It's an adaptation, a system of adaptation.
But you want to be aware of it or something, right? So you know how this is working, so it doesn't end up being like an unconscious thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of more like running the ship or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to like put that out there because this is going to be different. And then at the end, we can talk about whether it's similar or not similar.
Sure.
All right. Yogacara. Here we go. Right. Now onto something completely different. So there are these kind of, there's this school of Buddhist thought, like, and Zen kind of fits into it too. So this is a little bit of a Zen vibe to this. And they really just have like a different way of discussing ego kind of like all together. Like I said in the backstory of the episode, that's the first thing that came to mind when you brought that word up. And in it, again, there's this super claim about like, what's the nature of how the mind connects with external reality? That's like the big thing. So the argument in the end is going to go like, there is no external world apart from mind and consciousness. And so what the hell does that mean? And then what does the ego have to do with this is what we're going to try to talk about, right? But they say, this is the yogic realization. This is what you're supposed to realize, like this. Okay, as a way to start understanding this idea, it's kind of like useful to look at like consciousness itself. Now that's another fucking hard word. Ego, consciousness, all these things are really like tough words.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna present kind of the take on it that you get in sort of this Asian thought. And we'll kind of see where it leads us as we go. So on the one hand, we certainly have like 5 sensory consciousnesses. And this is, what will be talked about here. All kinds of schools of Buddhist thought, this mind-only school of thought too. We know the world through our sight, our sound, our smelling, our taste, our touch, right? We got these 5 sensory consciousnesses. And Buddhism pays a lot of attention to this. I think Asian thought overall pays a lot of attention to it, because there's a real concern about like, what's the nature of mind and the rest of the world? Like, how does that work? What is that about? Probably in a way we'll talk about more later that we don't always think about in our culture and the way, or Western culture. And whether we even say our culture anymore, I don't know. Sometimes I don't even know if I want to call it my culture, because I don't know if I feel like it's my culture anymore.
I think it's just the culture, whether it's yours
maybe
or
the
not
culture.
yours.
Yeah.
The.
So there's that, right? And then they talk about the idea of a 6th consciousness, which I think when I first learned this was like, that was new to me. I think I first stumbled across this idea in undergrad, and I was at U of C, and I read some book on Buddhism. I don't even know where I got it or why I got it, but it got to this point where they talked about mental consciousness, and I was like, I never thought about that before. But the idea is that we do experience kind of our own inner worlds. We experience our own feelings, our own thoughts. We feel the deeper things that drive us on some level, and we can look at those too, right? And in a certain sense, they're things that we're experiencing, because it's not stuff that you are consciously thinking a lot of times. It's just purposely thinking. It just stuff pops up. And anybody who's tried to meditate for like 5 seconds has realized that this is the case. Your mind will produce all kinds of stuff. It just does. It's going on all the time. So in the kind of like the Asian cultural world, Buddhist world, but to the extent that all this stuff influenced Asian culture overall, the spiritual culture that we're trying to talk about, well, this is just another thing you recognize. In a certain sense, it's you're experiencing the activity of your own mind, which gets you 6 of those. So what do you think about that idea? When did you first hear about that, Daniel? And how did you react to that? Did you have a similar thing with that?
Yeah, I don't know that I heard it like that. Like they didn't, I don't think I got the label, that like
Mhm.
this is the sixth consciousness is, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But in definitely in context of Buddhist meditation, so Vipassana, or you know, even in shamatha, any Buddhist meditation, they'll talk about the inner workings of the mind, you know, and in in a different way than simply, like, not simply, but like in sort of modern discussion on mindfulness, right? They'll just say thoughts come and go, be with the breath, or be here, be present, which you're doing anyways. But in the, I guess, in like the sort of, at least from my interpretation, the Buddhist view is one of self-discovery, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Looking at how you know stuff. I know stuff through my sense consciousness, but I also know stuff from experiencing whatever my own internal mind is doing, right? It's
And
another
so
way
that,
of
like,
knowing stuff.
you're able to not just like let it come up and then go, but then have a level of recognition,
Mhm.
and then see if those streams are what they're attached to. And so, not to just, you can certainly, depending on the type of meditation, you can certainly cut those streams of thought, which they'll say you can use like a little man with a sword or a woman with a sword, and just kind of chop it up and get back to whatever it is that you're doing. But that's one type. The other types are to look at that thing actually, from another perspective, not necessarily one of your own as you're sort of riding the waves, but more of like a third person observer, and say, okay, what tendencies are coming up in my mind? Am I thinking about my calendar? Am I thinking about my partner? Am I and these are the attachments, or
Mhm.
that we've discussed before. And when you can see tendencies and trends, then you're inherently learning about these kind of like unconscious drives that are always like ba, ba, ba,
Well,
ba, ba,
that's
ba,
your
ba.
identify, investigate, and so on, right? That you were talking about with this egos
Exactly.
thing. So, but
Exactly.
I think that's like part of like Buddhist thought, and like, you can even see how they correlate in an interesting way. Like, I heard something from someone that I really love, and she was talking about something she was thinking about in her life, and then she realized she had all this pain in her rib side, right?
Mm,
So, what happened in that moment? For that person, right? In that moment, you're thinking about like whatever that part of your life was, that you're thinking about, right? And then, you had your own thoughts and feelings going on. And then this sensory thing happened. All of a sudden, physical sensation happened. Bang, something happening in the body. And then it's all how you get aware of how these things kind of interconnect. And then it gives you a way to kind of figure out even what they mean to you. Because that
mm,
little king in the side is a certain kind of like alarm ringing. It's like a bell going ding, 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 ding. Like, think about this. You know what I mean? Because you can start to see that these things are going to affect one another. What is going on in this mental consciousness is going to affect your body, right? And probably even affect like not just like physically how your body feels, but even how you like see the world. You get in a certain frame of mind and the world just looks different through your eyes, or the music sounds better, or the food tastes richer if you're in a certain mental state,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If your feelings, your emotions are different. So it's all like how you learn about yourself and how you learn about how these things are interconnecting or something like that. Once
Hmm.
you get aware of these kind of like six things happening and how they entwine with one another, right? And our like a little in our professional world of like traditional Chinese medicine, of course, we think about this a lot. Of course, and putting a lot of emphasis on the body, but all of that kind of does like vibe together in this way. And you're knowing this through your own experiences. That's the consciousness part, right?
Hmm.
You're knowing it through how the body feels. You're meditating, some thought hits you, and you realize your body starts to, then you sort of learn something in that, right? And
Hmm.
that came through the consciousness of like touch and sensation, of your own body or something like that.
Hmm.
It's trippy, but that's how it is.
Yeah, I mean, and this, we've been having this discussion more a little bit on like, body consciousness, somatization,
Mhm.
things like this, like learning. And I know you're cool, you're cool with it. Sort of, it's becoming more in the lexicon of therapy now, the somatic type
I go
therapy.
back to like this has been the only reason I sometimes have the reaction I have is this has been a thing for me since like my 20s and shit.
Yeah,
I've been doing this stuff so long. So to me, it's not like new.
right.
And it's kind of like there's just rebranding of the same old ideas. And so
Yeah,
sometimes I react a little bit like, okay, this person is hijacking this other old idea and calling it something new so they can sell a new book or something. So I kind of
sure.
roll my eyes a little bit,
Right. And which I can understand,
but
but
it's okay. I mean, it's still the ideas are getting out there and it's important. That's
yeah,
my own personal like,
that's what it
all right.
is. The
Yeah,
ideas
that's
are
what it
getting
is.
out there, and it
Like the
puts people.
body keeps the score that you brought up. That shit's like as old as the sun.
Sure, sure,
That's
but I
not
mean,
like a new thing.
yeah, but nothing is new.
Okay, fine. And if
right?
you can rebrand it and make some money off of it, I don't know. I don't like that shit.
Yeah, but I think, but it's representative of a culture shift, not necessarily one
Full
individual.
disclosure, I've never read the book, so I have no opinion about it
Right.
beyond that.
I just bashed it, but I don't care about it. You know, it's no big deal.
It's not that book in particular. It's just
Right.
like, it just happened to get in the way of my bashing.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, yeah. But I
I'm
think,
not
you know,
saying anything against the personal.
no, but I think it does put people back in contact with some other aspect of themselves, because they've abandoned that, you know, they've abandoned the physical signs, right? Whether they're thinking, I mean, so if somebody has the awareness of having a thought then having a pain, they've made that connection.
Yeah.
Right. If somebody doesn't have that connection to their body, then they're just thinking, then this is just kind of like a thing that's floating around, and the thought on the inside also then floats around. So there's this level of awareness that when you bring your mind back on the inside and you can sense things, if we can start somewhere in the body and have a gross sensation, because I feel like body sensations are gross, as in they're much louder.
They're obvious.
They're obvious. When
Yeah.
you get into the mind, sometimes it's obvious, but a lot of the time it's more subtle. You know, especially when
It
you
might
get to
depend on the
smaller
person though,
forms.
Daniel, though. You know what I mean? Like, you're kind of a Capricorny, earthy dude, right?
Mhm.
You have some awareness of your body. So other people, like, it might be their emotions that are super powerful, and that's the
Sure.
thing they feel. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to like even disagree with you. I agree. I know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? The sensations of the body are pretty salient, you know?
Yeah,
You get
yeah,
a paper cut, even you're like, holy shit, that hurts. You know,
Yes.
they're
Yeah.
salient, right? But you know, there is this thing of like, you know, people will attune to different parts, and that's what's so interesting about it. And then people can kind of go off in different ways of what might like attract them and attach them or
Right.
something, and could keep you
Right.
from seeing the big picture, maybe.
Mm.
Yeah. Does that make any? We're agreeing essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're agreeing. I'm just saying it's a practice of being aware of yourself. Whatever system you're using, you know, the increase of awareness on what's going on the inside is the movement, as opposed to, I don't know what's going on in here, I'm just driving this truck. You know?
I can say, like, you know, back when I started doing this Zen thing, you just sit still for a fucking long time. And a lot of stuff happens in your mind and in your body. And I did start to learn, and I had this really deep body work too, which we haven't talked about too much. Maybe we'll do some other episodes on like what it's like to respond to some of this body work stuff psychologically. Again, that was in my 20s, and it was intense, and it was very useful. Exactly the way you're talking about, because the body's so meaningful, right? Some people might even say it's keeping the score. Anyways, I had this Zen therapy done. And it was an interesting experience, but I did start to realize, like, oh, my body's going to tell me stuff.
Yeah.
It is going to like communicate. It's going to tell me some of what I feel about things, which I think was new for me, because I had done psychology. I had gotten my head shrunk. I got some of that stuff. I had learned how to look at my own thoughts and emotions maybe, but I hadn't fully correlated with that physical stuff, right? Like in a way that would probably be pretty natural for us now, given our traditional Chinese medicine orientations. Okay, that clicks. But at the time, that hadn't clicked for me yet. I knew my mind and I knew my emotions, but I didn't always feel how it connected with the body. Yeah.
I think that for most people, they don't have that experience. They don't have the head shrinking experience. They don't have these kind of, you know, body work. It's just not a thing. So
I was a pretty driven person, so I was like seeking pretty intense.
You're looking for threads to jump on and connect and follow all the way back up. And so
I'll pop some acid, I'll get some body work. I mean, that was my 20s. What do I have to do?
Yeah.
Sit on a cushion 12 hours a day to understand myself. Okay, I'll do that. I'll get this guy to shrink my head. Some guy gives me a tab. I'll take that. You know, whatever fucking has to happen. I
think most are not so adventurous. And so, you know, they have to use sort of like the most gross tools to work their way in. And the most
interesting. Yeah.
You know, and the most gross tools is this here, you know,
you're giving good advice. It's kind of like, pay attention to your body. They'll probably tell you stuff.
Right. And then if you can take it, but if you could take that and not stop there, I think is your point. Like, it's not just that. You're not just a gross machine, you know, then you sort of work your way backwards and say, okay, you're feeling this, but what is that feeling actually? Is there an emotion associated with it? Okay, well, what's the emotion attached to? What does that do for you? How did you know what I'm saying? Like, it starts to move more deeply, and then we could say, what are the archetypes potentially, or what are the tendencies that, you know, the aggregates that are being cultivated or that are calling out, or, you know, whatever the case is, you know? And this is kind of like the beauty actually of our own medicine, right? Of TCM, of whatever you want to call it, East Asian medicine and philosophy, is that union between all of them. That like can give you the mind altering experiences of, you know, being in a deep meditative state on the acupuncture table, or in meditation, or during Qigong or Tai Chi, whatever, you know? So
last thing I thought, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No. And that to me fits right in with the 6 consciousnesses.
Yeah. Cause then it's how you learn how your mind, your feelings, your emotions also interact with these other consciousnesses, with
Yeah.
these other experiences.
Yeah.
We're going to be doing something on relationships, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about Freud, a little bit about this guy named Wilhelm Reich, and they're kind of, especially Reich is probably the original body keeps the score person or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, there's that whole complex relationship, because just to put it like into I'm thinking of one person in particular, but just to put into a context, you could have tons of bodily feelings and not want to know what that's saying, and you can
Yeah.
block that out.
Yeah.
Right. So there is a kind of like a way that you get in a lot of the stuff that we love of trying to pull these things together.
Yeah.
The awareness, the making unconscious conscious idea, right? This is what you're trying to get to have happen. And then this way of talking, well, that's how you learn how you have these 6 consciousnesses, and they kind of like affect one another. Right. Okay. So so that's the basic. And again, a lot of Asian thought will talk this way, and they kind of stop there. Usually you say 6. So if you get interested in Buddhist stuff and you start looking, you get a lot of like 6 consciousnesses. The one that was weird for me was now I had to add this mental consciousness. And maybe for me, I was someone who was so interested in like my own thoughts and ideas and stuff that I was just like, well, I'm not experiencing that, I'm creating that,
Sure.
But there is those moments where when you have to sit and meditate, where you realize, well, no, I'm not creating this. This is a bunch of shit spewing out. It has its own agenda. Stuff is just going.
I think
right?
people don't. I think people don't really talk about that actually very often in
It
sort
was
of
very insightful when I first read it. I was like, ooh, that's an insight.
because the issue. Somebody wanted to come on the podcast. I won't mention her name. We got an email. We've got some emails from some people. So podcast bookers, if you're listening to this, listen to what we're saying. I'm going to say now before you reach out and ask if you can come on the show and promote some particular thing. Like, you got to vibe with what we're vibing on. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm open. We have tons of people on here who have very different ideas, but like, whatever, we do our thing. And anyways, we're open to everybody, but we're also open to saying no. So,
but being open is also open to be not being open.
We're free to choose, baby. We're free. No, but the point is that like
open to be closed.
People may say, oh, I want to sit down, and they have this idea that meditation is like shutting off of the mind, which obviously we've said that's not true many, many times.
Yeah. Bob Thurman really bashes that. If you
want yeah. But then to your point, like people then think, okay, now I'm going to control it. I'm going to control this thing that's talking all the time. You could certainly try, and you can get pretty good at it, actually, But then to also be aware that it is a flow of stuff that's kind of like doing its thing. It's always running, actually, and that like doesn't say anything about you as a character, good or bad. It's just, but it's happening, And so when you become aware of that thing, that's it's kind of like the first step. You're like, sort of like, all right, now I have to make changes to this infinite flow of stuff that's happening, right? You got to get my sieve out.
Even on the psychology thing, it wasn't an accident that Freud came up with this idea of like stream of consciousness, even to get people to pay attention to this thing, because it's like, so part of his original thing, for whatever it's worth, you can like him or not like him. There's reason to not like him for sure.
Sure.
But even this Bobby T, Robert Thurman says there's parts of him that's genius, and he recognized like there's this flow going on inside of people, and maybe we gotta make them look at that so they can figure out how this is affecting them, right? Yeah. Okay, lots of stuff we could say about this, but I'll push it so we can do the Chitta Mantra thing, right? Yeah. We'll get your reaction to it too, Daniel, because I am curious what you think about this. So in the Chitta Mantra school, in this mind-only school, yogic experience school, they say there are 2 other levels that make up people. And per what we've been talking about, first we can look at the ego and what this means in this way of thinking. Now, the word ego, we've talked about it maybe a little bit in the previous episodes. I don't recall exactly, but it really means like I. That's all it means. I, like the letter I, like I. And Freud actually, when he talked about this in German, just used the German word for I, which is ich. So he just is like, yeah, it's I, So this Chitta Mantra school introduces this idea of I or ego here, but they say it in a very particular way. So you'll see this talked about in a couple of different little phrases. The one shows the massive downside. The other one kind of hides it a little bit, but it's not a good thing. So it'll be a little bit of a different from what you were talking about, Daniel, or introducing for us. So sometimes they'll call this the afflictive mental consciousness. Afflictive. Sometimes they'll talk about it, the afflictive I consciousness, or sometimes they'll just say like the I maker, or the thing that makes ego. There's an ego making level of the consciousness of a person. This is special to this particular way of thinking, this mind only way of thinking, but it's kind of a powerful idea. I guess in the Sanskrit, it's ahamkara or something, though my Sanskrit isn't always that hot.
Yeah, ahamkara,
Aham meaning I and kara meaning maker, right? So this I maker idea. So what they're trying to point out is we all have this sense of self that's kind of related to our own inner and outer experiences. And at times we could be thinking about like, oh, my knee hurts, or oh, I got that paper cut, or whatever. Sometimes it'll be in our emotions, sometimes it'll be in our thoughts. These things are kind of changing and flitting around all the time, right? So when you start paying attention, you can start to go like, I had this emotion, now it changed. I had this thought, now it changed. You know, that's the whole idea of like just recognizing the flow of things, like what you were talking about. Oh, shit's flowing and I'm not in the same space all the time. You know, can't step in the same river twice or whatever. Things are flowing along. So say that's just going to flow. But there's this deeper sense of like this I maker, this ego maker, which imposes this idea upon the person that there is this unitary, permanent, independent thing.
Yeah.
I. Or you could even say that it's kind of like limited. So it has this negative effect of like creating this thing, not only of like unitary, permanent, independent, this
separate,
what would be kind of like an illusion, but separate,
yeah.
Independent, separate, and like cut off from the world around me, cut off from all the energies of the world around me. And then also in the sense like limited. So it's kind of like you could say like a truncating thing, a thing that puts up these artificial barriers and boundaries that aren't really there. Right. And so it's already kind of like a problem and that it's kind of like delusional or illusory or something. And the point that they're trying to make is then as people, as living things, not just people, but I guess everybody, you know, squirrels and raccoons and grasshoppers or whoever you are out there who might be listening, donkeys, that we actually identify with this thing, right? You know, that this is what creates our identification with this. And I was reading one of the, I don't have his name in front of me here. This is bad, but I'll make sure I'll shoot a credit over for him, maybe when we write the episode or something, because he does a good job explaining this. But it ends up being like a cause of a lot of troubles, right? And they would argue that from this point of view, the cause of like all the troubles are coming from this, right? And it creates a lot of like weird internal dialogue in people that's negative. It creates a lot of like weird internal white noise that's confusing, and it kind of filters and colors our experiences and does this thing to them. It makes them much more limited, right? It cuts us off from the full range. I thought about this as I was prepping this, you know, of the shower curtain of wisdom in the next room. And, you know, the whole idea of the ayahuasca quote that I have from the one artist. Is it Pablo Amaringo? Is that his name, Daniel?
I don't know.
Okay. Anyways, great, like kind of shamanic artist. And he just says like, you know, it's the thing that happens with ayahuasca is it like overcomes this and it helps you realize that this is illusory, right? He has something like not verbatim, but like, you know, give or take, you know, like paraphrasing, that's what it's about. It tells us that our experiences are illusory. And so it's this kind of like in like this weird filter. The meditative thing, and I like the way it's said in the book I was using sort of prep these materials, but they talk about like ego radio. When you sit and meditate, you realize I have all of this going on. And they say that's this thing, this afflictive mental consciousness, this seventh thing that's like in play, kind of blah, blah, blahing away all the time, obstructing all the time, doing all this stuff. Now, in this case, it's not being presented as if like it's a good thing that's adapting or whatever. This is being presented obviously negative.
This is probably more akin to that defensive part of the, you know, the existential guardian operating system that I was, you know, referencing the last couple of weeks. This particular part, this sort of like this guarding thing, the personality traits that we use to keep ourselves sort of, I guess, protected in a way, you know.
So the thing that they're saying is that it's going to be a major block like all the way through. You know what I mean? It's the thing that creates this delusional sense. So I don't mean to cut you off on it, but yeah, they're going kind of deep. Does that fit into what you're thinking? Because like,
that's exactly. I mean, that's exactly
okay.
What. That's like, I don't know this level. I know this, but I don't know this. You know, I know it through what I've what
Yogic experience.
yogic experience. So I experienced
Yeah.
this
Mhm.
in writing the episode a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
That's what I
Yeah.
realized as I was reading and going through. I was like, oh, here's this thing that's
Mhm.
inside that is like, it's guarding. That's it's in the name, right? That's
Mhm.
what it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
It's but then as I went forward, I'm like, well, I don't want to look at it only as like this negative thing because it's here. So if it's here and it's not going anywhere and it's only negative, well then to me that's like dualistic and I'm only giving it one aspect. And if I want to have integration with it, it can't only be, a poison pill. I got to get high from it at least once or twice,
Yeah, it can't just be, there must be some pleasure I'm getting from this.
I need something, give me a little bit, a buzz,
Yeah, little buzz, little tingle, little something.
something, relaxing.
Yeah.
Give me a little bit.
Yeah. Like neck rub, shoulder rub.
Yeah, yeah. But that's exactly my
So
take.
like in this take of this is like the main, like kind of like the main obstructive thing, and it's stopping like a ton of real potential realizations. That's the idea, right? Then on the meditation side, then the idea is that this kind of like, the more you meditate, the more you sort of like take away from this, it gets weaker and weaker. If you want to use like the fire metaphor or something, you kind of cook this thing and it starts to melt down and it becomes less and less of an obstructive thing in the person's life or something. We'll do some episodes on, because we're gonna do some psychology and relationship stuff. We'll talk about Carl Rogers, and he thinks this way too. Like your existential guardian operating system is kind of close to his like false self-concept thing. Where it goes wrong, where the self-concept goes wrong. But when you kind of like melt this thing
Carl
away,
Rogers, Eric. It's Carl Rogers and it's me.
Well, you're buying. It's like a photo finish at the end.
That's it. I better dive forward. Good thing I had a long Roman nose,
Yeah. So, anyways, and the point is like, as this happens, then the person can get kind of closer to enlightenment, or closer and closer, at least, to truth, seeing things more and more clearly, right? Because you lose these obstructions from this thing, whether you want to call it an existential guardian operating system or an
whatever
ahamkara, or whatever you want to call it, to the extent that this is an obstructive problem, right? So it's clearly not being framed in a good way, though. You sort of wonder, like, maybe you need a little of this again, otherwise you just stumble around and fall down the flight of stairs. You need something to protect you. You can't just go like,
should I eat this poisonous berry? Who cares? Go for it. Whatever.
It's all my ego. Fuck it.
Yeah.
And then you sit there, your ego vomits for 3 days. Yeah, I don't know. So I do get the idea of what you're saying. In this way of thinking, though, they're really saying it's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? They're definitely framing it as a problem.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that like meditation's trying to overcome, or from the shower curtain of wisdom, the ayahuasca is trying to like give the little breakthrough to start overcoming, to get over this thing, right? That's the slant of this school for sure. Yeah. Okay. So then you get to the point of like, what is it covering up? And then this gets really intensely interesting too. Okay. So I think you have to say, and this is what we've been talking about from like sort of a very universal spiritual point of view, this thing is limiting. Okay, cool. And what's it limiting? What's it cutting you off from? And you really could say like probably the deeper mysteries of life and the deeper truths of the universe and the deeper blisses and the deeper amazements that are there in the universe. It's cutting you off. Sucks, right? And I think you can kind of recognize it psychologically. You can recognize it in meditation, a lot of stuff. Like psychologically, as we've been kind of going back and forth between these two things, you do sort of recognize this eventually. I got a personality, or what I'm calling a personality, and it sucks. It has to go. This thing I'm calling my personality, it's just a bag of shitstorm. It has to go out in the trash with it. So, I mean, you do sort of realize that, I think, even in psychology. But in this school, they're starting to say something kind of special about what it's covering up. And they're saying it's covering up this realization of mind only. So what does that mean? We'll get to it maybe in a couple of different routes to it, because it's such a deep idea. And then, we'll kind of maybe share our reactions to it or something like that. So the first thing maybe to say about it, though, to get to it, is this idea that we had 6 levels of like experience and consciousness, right? 5 senses, you can experience your own mind. Now they're saying there's this other thing. You can experience this ego thing inside you, your existential guardian operating system. You can experience that thing, right? That's part of something inside of you too. Then they add this 8th thing. So this is kind of unusual. They'll talk about 8 levels of a person.
They're just making shit up now.
Isn't everybody?
Yes.
That's the point. You're right in their wheelhouse.
After the 8th, there's a 12th thing.
Well, self-concept, existential guardian operating system, id, ego, superego. What is this stuff?
Form on formless.
But I think it's like a way of trying to like talk about the world to point out things that are useful.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, yeah. So so this eighth level of thing is this idea of what they call the mind basis of all. Or if you get deep into the Buddhist world, you might hear this phrase called alaya, Alaya. And maybe you get in other parts of Asian culture too. Certainly a lot of this stuff will find its way all over the place because it's a way of talking about all the different karmic energies that are associated with a person, right? So in the kind of Asian framework, you have all of this sort of energetic stuff around you, all of this karmic energy, right? We've gone through all these lives, we've accumulated these things. We're accumulating them in this life now. So we're accumulating all of these associated kind of energetic imprints, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you always have to figure out like how to talk about this exactly. There's a stream of that person, right? The flow of their being, their spirit. A lot of times, like they say, just consciousness with this, right? There's this flow, but you're accumulating these sort of energetic little imprints, right? And it's kind of like energy, right? Karma. Gelik Rinpoche would talk about this in some ways, like great Gelik Rinpoche, where he would say, like, sometimes when you're doing quantum mechanics, maybe you'll find this eventually. All these little karmic imprints are probably all over the place, right? So this is the idea of how they talk about it. They say you have this whole level of who you are. That's a vast sea of these karmic imprints. And so you're supposed to kind of imagine this incredible warehouse of energy and karmic seeds that we all kind of present sort of there in some kind of quantum way that's associated with us. And we're carrying all of this energetic history of this lives and maybe previous lives, and all this stuff is flowing along with us, right? This is this idea of this mind basis of all. And so we can't see that, right? We don't see it. And they're saying part of the reason why we don't see it clearly is because of this afflictive mental consciousness. We can't fully see this, And even when events are happening that should ring our bells to recognize it, a lot of times people don't, right? You can get like a slap in the face that can tell you, hey, there's something deeper going on like this, but you won't see it. And they're saying in part why, because you're like so wrapped up in this smaller sense, like who you are, what you're doing, what you think is important, all this kind of shit like that. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Very.
Yeah. So you have this thing going on and you can't see this whole other part. So that's part of what the ego is hiding. It's hiding this deeper reservoir of who you are, right? This incredible storehouse of like energetic potential with all of these different little seeds in it. And, they're going to affect your experiences in the world, right? And they're going to say also going to change what the world's going to do, right? These things are going to affect what the world's going to do to you. You just can't see it. You're going to say something. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Curious your reaction to these things too, because it's deep, right?
So we just came back from a week-long retreat in Mexico to our friend's place, Kumankaya, who Remy was been on podcast before, and people got a chance to get away from their life, and yes, it's the ego that is, or in this description of the ego, that is keeping people separate and sort of not able to see these things. But in addition to that, it's also the world. It's also people's habits. It's their responsibilities. It's all the things that they have to do. Their dogs, their wives, their husbands, their children, their, bills, everything. And yeah, that's all part of life, right? Just in general. But simultaneously, it also requires our most limited resource, which is time. And if you don't have the prioritization of your time in order to do the internal dive that is going to take to even get to like level 1 to say, oh, what's going on inside of me? Not even necessarily be aware of any of these other things. This other stuff is going to be so far abstract that the conversation won't even occur. So I think I wanted to just make the point that it's the ego also, but then it's the place in which that we are living that doesn't allow for this kind of like internal, that even the opportunity for this internal reflection, nor is there a place in society where this type of internal reflection really has legs. Where is the conversation around these types of things? You know what I'm saying? Like these sort of like quote unquote spiritual ideologies, spiritual in what sense? You know what I'm saying? Like even the word spirituality, what is that? I don't even know what that it means. I know we can look up the definition and write it down, but I guess it's associated with something that we don't want to call God or something like that. Like to me, this is like internal discovery, self-discovery. What else do you need to figure out in life? I'm like, okay, we can be an expert at, physics or, radio waves or, whatever, microphones, I don't know, right? Which are important to give back into the world. But like, in addition to diving into a topic, why not dive into who it is that you are all the damn time? Like, you aren't anybody else ever. And so like the idea that like that would be totally skipped out, I think we're not giving enough weight to the place that we are currently residing in, where these things are just like moved off into some like random realm that doesn't get discussed, but only with people who have like, dream catchers. Here's mine. Oh, I'm aware. And incense and robes, but that's not true. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think this is, to me, this should be taught in school personally.
Oh yeah, you're right.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So yeah.
So, for me, like, this is so funny because I got my exact same bitching rant at the end, which is like, we talk a lot about society, rules, norms, structures in the society, and so on. And I put in notes, at least I do, but you do too. So yeah, again, if it's verbatim. So if one is spending one's time, energy, mind immersed in all the things that this culture has set up as like, you got to do all of this, right? It's an amazing thing about adult life when you start to notice that. I remember when I realized, like, there's not one fucking second if you let adult life run amok to do anything else.
No.
Like this whole, at least, I'm talking about America. We got people from other places. You can let us know. But like, if you kind of let it, every single moment of every single bit of time will be taken up with some responsibility that you're like, some box to check, some form to send in, some other thing to do. Like every single fucking second will be taken up with something. And so if that's the case, and all these responsibilities and all the different things that people tell you you're supposed to value more than this, which may have value, those things, but they're supposed to consume everything. How are you supposed to see this? How are you supposed to take the time to see it?
I am curious. So we probably have maybe like a quarter to a third of our audience that's international. And so I'm very curious. If you're not from the US, I would love to hear your take on this, because I think for both Eric and I, we feel like I don't feel like this is uniquely American. I think this is uniquely Western, and I think the Western culture is ubiquitous in most of the world, most of the developed world.
It's invasive.
It's
an invasive culture.
But I would
don't be naive about it. It's invasive.
I agree.
We'll talk about this more in future episodes too, because I got some stuff on this coming up. But it's invasive.
But I would love to hear from people from around different parts of the globe, in an email, and you can email us at ginandtantra@gmail.com. And just let me, or leave a comment in the YouTube video. That's certainly cool too. I just like to hear your experience. Do you believe this to also be in your part of the world? Because, I don't have, I have some people who live in other parts of the world that maybe I'll have this discussion with them. I think it's probably very similar, but we're open to all different folks from all over.
It kind of depends. Like, I think once you get this, and I'll say it, once you get this capitalistic kind of materialistic, and we're going to talk more about this in a little bit, culture stepping in with all of its ideas of how things are supposed to be. And it's tied in with a lot of stuff. It's, I'm going to talk about in future episodes. It's tied into religion. It's tied into how the culture's organized. It's like, there's a whole thing around this, right? How you're supposed to conduct your life, how you're supposed to conduct your relationships, how you're supposed to do everything. There's a lot of this whole thing. And there's a reason to be suspicious.
Yeah.
Like, why is it set up this way? And I think at some point or another, you have to kind of look and say, okay, there's some element of probably trying to control people in this. One of the main ways that you control people it's a soft mechanism of control, isn't it? But it has a threat, because if you don't take care of this thing, I'll ding your bank account for that. If you don't take care of this thing over here, HR, if you work, sends you an email. Now you got to do this other thing, like you're constantly like in the midst of all of these petty tasks, like incessantly, right? Isn't that true?
Yeah, no, it's true. I think though, so there's a delineation here. Because, as I'm working a little bit more in the medicine community and whatnot, I'm also noticing that, like, in that sort of spiritual kind of community, well, quote unquote, spiritual community, is also laden in conspiracy theory, right? And as we're talking about society's power structures in general, I can hear someone being like, oh, see, they're talking about it. They're talking about the invisible hand that governs. And if someone's thinking that, I will grant you your argument temporarily, because studying conspiracy or studying how the societal pressures act on us is one part of the thing. But why would you study something is to learn, right? And then once you have knowledge, then knowledge provides you with some amount of like freedom of choice. So the choice, you can do, multiple things. One, you can go back and loop in and study more and keep wanting to find out what the truth really is. That is, to me, a mental masturbation. It's pissing in the wind. For me,
you're talking about the kind of like, it's almost like, I don't want to compare it just to QAnon, but it's kind of like that kind of a thing, right?
Yeah, it's
who's pulling the wheels and who's doing,
who's pulling the strings of
who's pulling the strings up. Yeah, who's turning the wheels, who's pulling the strings, who's the kings and queen makers, and what's the
right, and then who's controlling them,
who's the chart of them, and then who's
who's in charge of them, and then who's in charge of them, and who's behind them. What I'm saying? Like this infinite, like,
well, I think that's where that Gnostic thing can just go.
It goes infinite. It goes on
forever, and you never get out of it.
You pull open the curtain, and instead of like Oz, an old man behind a keyboard, it's like a Russian doll that has like a million people on the inside.
More and more curtains. You're like,
yeah, exactly. It's the same thing over and over again.
A doll in a curtain. Yeah.
My point in saying this is that, like, so that's one way of becoming caught in a loop, right? But for me, actually, the drive then is on the inside is to change the self. Right, is to change the internal structure so that you can exist as a more free being within this structure, within the thing that's already in place. Because every being who has enlightened themselves, and we do enlighten ourselves. We're influenced by other people, but ultimately the final step is our own leap to take. And it's probably not a leap. I love how in some of the Zen philosophies they talk about like realization is like finding out you have a nose.
Yeah.
They're like, oh yeah, there it is. But like everybody who's enlightened themselves in their life has done so within some amount of structure that was, sort of antithetical to their own way of thinking or believing. And so that's kind of
that's true. You go to some Zen masters that are living in feudal Japan. That society doesn't want them to get enlightened.
No,
there's no interest in that.
no interest whatsoever. So yeah. We always look back with reverence and say it was so much easier. And in 30 years from now, when the AI takes over, then
we'll all be doomed.
Right. But like your own salvation is on you. Actually, it's on you. So we talk about the external power structures as a reminder that, like, yes, that's a real thing, but that also not to get caught up on it and to take that energy that you want to fight against it and go back in and do that work on yourself, because a more free being helps everybody.
That obsession with that kind of the system is part of the system.
That's correct.
It's how it gets you to waste your life, like spending time on like crap within it. That's not out of the system. That is the system.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like when you first realize when I was a teenager, you see some guy dressed like some posing goth way who looks like he's the lead singer from The Cure, and you realize like he's just dressing that way. Right. There's nothing else happening deeper inside. It's the same shit. Like it's just a show, The counterculture is just the culture, and it's just if you want to think this way, and sometimes I do, it's just another ruse. It's just another dead end street going nowhere, right? Set up to have you waste your time. Because then you'll be on this fucking thing.
And what they develop, the infinite scrolling, right? Just keep going, keep
on more crap, that type. So it doesn't go anywhere. You'll just spend your time thinking about that in some kind of weird paranoid whatever, right?
Anyway,
I know people who get lost in that stuff. Yeah, no, it's an important subject, right?
Yeah.
Well, I know what we're going to do with this. We got one last big chunk of this, and you got to be out in like 5 minutes. So we wrap it, or you want to how do you want to handle it?
Yeah, let's wrap it right here.
Okay, that sounds like an episode.
Yeah.
Okay, then we'll guess what we'll do next time was look at like what else the ego is hiding.
Yeah,
the ego's supposed to be hiding one other major thing, and it's a cool subject matter,
Naughty.
And and I think it'll give us a chance to preview. We'll get to talk about our old friend Dean Radin. We have to talk about one of our other favorite Carls, Carl Jung, again, right? We'll pop up again. We'll talk about him. We'll talk about Rupert Sheldrake, who refused to come on the show. Rupert,
come on.
We invited you. I did try to get him to come on the show just as a thing. I wrote him, and I got a very polite, he's like a British scientist and kind of intellectual thinker. He's fun. And so after we had Dean Radin on, we were like, what the fuck? So I wrote Rupert Sheldrake. I got this very polite British letter back about, he's very busy, but thanks and blah, blah, blah. And I wrote one follow-up letter, and they just didn't write again.
So you should have followed
Where's
up
your
with,
British politeness? What happened to it, British people?
followed up with an insult. See if we got
Fuck Rupert Sheldrake, the old fucking geezer. I don't want him on my show anyways. He's just a copycat poser. He's just stealing other people's shit.
There's
Send.
There's that ego right there. I love it. I love it.
I was like, okay. I put another email that just said like, well, if he ever has the time, I know he's an old guy, I understand. Yeah. Anyways.
Perfect.
It's
Well,
been
Eric,
fun sending these things. All right. See you, Daniel.
as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody, for watching, for listening. If you liked our work, then please feel free to share it. If you're on the YouTube, give us a like and a comment, or whatever the people tell you to do. You should probably do it, or don't do it, because you're free to choose, man. Do your thing, whatever you want. Hell, unsubscribe. Everyone tells you to subscribe, unsubscribe, whatever.
Yeah, radical freedom.
That's right. We're radically free. But if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, give us a review. It definitely helps the show out. I can't think of anything else. Email ginandtantra@gmail.com, Instagram ginandtantra, and feel free to find me on Facebook. You could send me a message on there. All the ways to get a hold of us. We certainly love feedback. And for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.